Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America, we bring the resource to you. The DU Podcast with your host, Dr. Mike Brazier.
We're going to go out west on this episode and visit with one of our Ducks Unlimited staff members in the California Central Valley. And specifically, we're going to welcome in a good friend of mine, a longtime friend of mine, Matt Kaminski, a regional biologist out of Fresno, California. Matt, welcome into the show.
Thank you, Mike.
It's good to have you on this. You know, I introduced you as a longtime friend and colleague. I think you and I have known one another for close to 25 years as I was kind of thinking about this as we set this up. And yeah, that's a long time, Matt. You and I could probably tell some stories on one another, but I think we'd be wise not to do that. So we can just both at the outset agree on that. Do we have a deal?
That's right. We can just we can sum it up and just say Hell State.
That's right. In reference to Mississippi State, to be clear there, yeah. Matt, I think what we wanted to have you on here today for is to give us a little update on a couple of things. First, we are using the podcast to introduce a lot of our listeners and supporters to some of our staff across the country and the work that we do, and you're obviously in that category. And then once we do that, I want you to tell us a little bit about what you're seeing with respect to waterfowl abundance, habitat conditions. We've had some folks listening to the podcast, and they've reached out to us and said, hey, it'd be nice to get some updates from out west. And so we don't have any aerial survey data to report on out west. You and I talked about that, and we discussed whether California or any of the other western states conducted those surveys right now, and they don't, so we'll have to wait for the midwinter survey for some of those numbers. But I know you get out in the field a little bit, so we wanted to pick your brain and share some of that information with the people. But let's start with you just giving us a bit of an overview on what you do for Ducks Unlimited and where you're located, just so people get some sense of what are our biologists doing out there.
Sure. Well, like you've said, I'm a regional biologist. My primary focus is to deliver conservation work from an area just south of the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. It's around Modesto, California, all the way down to Bakersfield. So it's really two big subbasins, the San Joaquin Basin and the Tulare Basin. My main goal is to work with private and public landowners in those regions, develop conservation projects, and write grants to help facilitate delivery of those projects.
Yeah, Matt, I know I've spent a little time out in California. I worked out in the Los Banos area for, I guess it's about 6 months back in 1996, I think the year was. And so I'm roughly familiar with some of the waterfowl habitats out in that landscape. And so we're talking about rice. We're talking about some intensively managed wetlands that I think there's a lot of privately owned lands and high quality managed wetlands on those duck clubs and on those private lands. And so you interact with all of those players, right? You help deliver conservation projects on the state lands, on some of the federal lands, as well as some of the private lands. Do I have that right?
That's correct.
And so we're talking about some moist soil, sort of seasonally emergent wetlands, as well as some rice-associated wetlands. Do you do much work with the rice producers?
Well, rice in the San Joaquin Valley has been perpetually declining. Most of the rice production now in California is in the Sac Valley, which is north of Sacramento. There is a little bit of rice production around Merced National Wildlife Refuge and a little bit around Mendota Wildlife Area. But due to high salt in the soils and just the rising cost of water here in California, most rice production is now centered in the northern part of the valley.
Oh, and do you get up and do any up to the northern part of the valley to do any work there? Do we have some of our? I know we have one of the things we probably should say here is we have our Western Regional Office is located in, I think I'm going to get this, Rancho Cordova. Is that right, Matt?
That's correct. Yes.
Up around Sacramento, right?
That's right. Yeah. So we have a team that sort of works in each of the ecoregions of California. We have two biologists that work in the Bay Area and also the North Coast. We have two biologists that sort of deliver projects in the Sacramento Valley. That's Craig Gardner and John Ranlett. And then we also have a biologist, Aaron Will, that works in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. And then we also have Amelia Raquel that sort of works in Northeast California and then the Intermountain regions of Nevada.
Okay, yeah, I've met Amelia a couple of times, and it's I always have to reorganize my head with respect to where it is that she works, where her primary responsibilities are. We do anticipate getting her on to talk about some of the work that she does up there in that part of the state. So, Amelia, if you're listening, fair warning to you. And so, Matt, for you there in the San Joaquin Valley, are you sort of a one-person team, or what kind of additional staff do you have access to in that part of the valley?
In the San Joaquin Valley, it's myself and 2 engineers. We have Forrest Downing and Micah Bowman. Forrest is based down in the Three Rivers area, which is outside of Visalia, which is close to the gateway to Sequoia National Park. And then Micah is based here in Fresno. So we sort of have both our guys sort of centrally located in the valley, and they can sort of, stretch all the way up to Modesto or head down to Bakersfield, depending on where we're delivering our projects for that year and that time.
Okay, I think we'll probably at some point in the future have you back on to talk about some specific projects, maybe some of the examples of projects that you're working on or have worked on. Maybe if we have some programs, some partnerships that are highly influential out there in helping us deliver habitat within the Central Valley, we'll get you back on at some point to talk about that. But I think we want to shift right now because I know you well enough to know that I follow you on social media, and so I know that you've been able to get out and do your fair share of hunting. You do that every year, and a lot of folks within our field do that. And of course, the Central Valley is one of our most important geographies. Continentally, it's recognized as one of the most important wintering regions for waterfowl. Some species have a particular affinity to that area, pintails and cinnamon teal and things of that. And so you are a great person to talk to about those elements, the type of waterfowl we're seeing in that area, because I know you've been able to get out. You've actually been able to get out into one of the other states. I think I saw a picture of a photo from a swan hunt, I believe it was. So tell us a little about what you're seeing there in the Central Valley this year, and I don't know if you can characterize it relative to last year or historical sort of average, but what are you seeing in terms of bird numbers, in terms of habitat? I know a few weeks ago things were really warm out there, and I'll be honest, I haven't really kept up haven't heard much about what conditions and status of the migration is out there, but generally speaking, what are you seeing?
Well, what we're seeing is that we had a great spring and summer for breeding waterfowl here in California. So the mallard population responded to those favorable conditions, as well as local producing gadwall and cinnamon teal. And coupled with that, we had phenomenal carryover water from the winter, so we were able to irrigate a lot of our seasonal wetlands throughout the grassland ecoregion. And subsequently, a lot of food was produced here in the grasslands. And the table was set for a great opener, and we had some good weather. And overall, it was one of the best openers that a lot of guys had seen in years. Lots of pintails, green-winged teal, and northern shoalers, and local mallards were harvested. A lot of guys were fired up. The carryover from the opener went into about the first week. Guys were still shooting fair numbers of birds. And then the weather got pretty stale here. We got a huge high-pressure system that sort of centered itself over the whole western United States. And it just became quite warm, and the birds were able to find sanctuaries. We had a lot of clear nights. We had a long full moon, bright nights. So the birds were really sort of conditioning themselves to just eat one time a day, mostly at night, sit in the sanctuaries during the day. And then subsequently, some of those clubs were still able to, get some birds, but the hunting really slowed down. They call it Slowvember here in California, but this year the high pressure system really took a long time and to break. And subsequently, we didn't really get influxes of a lot of new birds. So the birds that we did get here got a little stale, and they just sort of figured out, where they could be safe. That's all changed recently. The last couple of weeks, we've had some pretty good storm systems come in, The high pressure system is obviously out. And last week we got over 4 inches here in the Los Banos area. And subsequently, a lot of clubs right now are flooded too deeply, and there's a lot of new fresh habitats. So the birds are sort of dispersing across the landscape because they've got a lot of new places to go. And a lot of clubs are not optimally flooded to those nice shallow depths that really favor, the green-winged teal and the pintail and such. So it's sort of a state of flux right now. But one thing I was going to say was that, the saving grace for the grasslands is during the slow time of November is that we have a lot of diving ducks that start filtering its way through from the Intermountain West and also coming down from Alaska and some of the coastal regions. So some of the duck clubs, they start getting their canvasbacks, their redheads, and their ringnecks. So a lot of clubs that are hunting and having a lot of success, so that's what they're primarily focusing on is some of those bigger diving ducks. And, it's a little different that, you always consider diving ducks are, big coastal lakes or coastal bays, and then, prairie potholes. And here in the grasslands, you can be sitting on a flooded Timothy pond and shooting canvasbacks and ringnecks. It's pretty cool. It's a unique little part of the world.
Yeah, as you were talking, Matt, here I am. Several questions are popping up. So I'm going to go back through these things and touch on these. So help me out here. When you started out by talking about how things set up quite well for good food production in the grassland. And so I want to describe that a little bit for our listeners, some that may not be that familiar with it. When you're saying grasslands, I think you touched on this earlier, but what's that referring to?
The grasslands is a consortium of protected private wetlands and state wildlife areas and federal areas that primarily centers around the Los Banos area. It's a large complex of wetlands and uplands that are highly managed for moist soil vegetation and also semi-permanent wetlands.
Am I correct in my memory that grasslands name is sort of used to refer to that particular region, and it's because historically that San Joaquin Valley was more of a grassland area? Am I right in that regard?
That is correct. San Joaquin Valley was, primarily, had one major river system through it, which was San Joaquin River and a few of its tributaries. So there was a riparian corridor that sort of followed those rivers and that, some of the braided streams that went with it. But most of the wetland complex was a grassland, seasonal wetland component.
Yeah, like a really flat landscape and grassland area. And so now those things, and of course they were seasonal wetlands when those rivers got out of their banks during the seasonally wet period. And at some point we'll have you back on and we'll talk in more detail about how the hydrology has been changed in that landscape and what it's meant for the way we provide and manage for those habitats. But basically I wanted to unpack that a little bit when you said food produced in the grasslands. And so you referenced that the food production you're talking about is that moist soil vegetation associated with those managed wetlands in that sort of grassland region. Yeah, so just to make sure we clarify that for some people that may not be familiar with that Central Valley area, what it looks like, the type of vegetation communities that are common out there, and really what the dominant wetlands are that waterfowl depend on. So that's point one there. Now, the other question that popped in my mind as you were talking is the opener. You said it was one of the best in, I think, recent memory for many people. And early on, you talked about how the Central Valley. Another thing that some folks may not be terribly aware of is that there are a large number of ducks that breed in the Central Valley of California in this landscape that has a mosaic of grasslands and wetlands in certain parts of it. And so there you do have some breeding waterfowl, as you referenced. Those birds, are they? My guess is that they're particularly important for that early season. Is that what you saw this year? And then that's why you had a really good opener, is because you were describing some good local production?
We had great local production, which really helps, when you're harvesting your local mallards, your gadwalls and such, and cinnamon teal. But we also had some earlier fronts that sort of set the stage for pushing some of those earlier green-winged teal that are migrating through. And, the bread and butter, ducks for the grasslands are pintails, shovelers, and green-winged teal. And we had a great influx of those green-winged teal early this year. And then, like I said, it sort of got stale. It got really warm, and the birds really didn't move around. We haven't had influx of birds. But, with this last, bout of storms. A lot of guys were going out, and it wasn't, particularly hot and heavy yet, but guys were definitely having more teal in the bag, and definitely seeing more teal in the landscape. So I think as the water retracts off the landscape after these sort of floods and such, we'll probably start seeing a few more birds pick up on a lot of these duck clubs. Yeah,
and the birds that you're getting, those early birds that are migrating down, are those primarily coming from Alaska? Or are we getting some also from Alberta? What's the majority of where are those birds derived?
It's sort of a mix. I mean, yes, we do definitely get a lot of birds that come from Alaska, the boreal forest, the prairies of Alaska, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. But we also get a lot of birds from the Intermountain West areas of eastern Washington, eastern Oregon, and parts of Nevada. There's lots of topics about all the birds that sort of contribute to the harvest of California.
Yeah, we talk a lot about, and rightly so, about the prairie pothole region and the boreal forest being so important from a continental standpoint, but there's also a lot of local production in those states out west that you mentioned, and the Intermountain West in Washington, Oregon, California, and then same as can be said for production in the Great Lakes states. And so we will have ample opportunity going forward to discuss some of those breeding populations as well. But that's a good reference for some of our folks there. And then also the divers, as you were talking about, coming through from the Intermountain West, like, are those birds being harvested in the same wetlands that you're harvesting the dabblers? As you're, typically we think of the divers of being associated with deeper waters as you described, but are you seeing those in the same emergent, reasonably shallow wetlands?
It depends. I would say yes on some of these duck clubs. Yes, you're shooting some of these divers in some of these shallower wetlands. But what's happening is some of these landowners have figured out that we've got divers and they have affinity for the swamp timothy. And swamp timothy, to give everybody what swamp timothy looks like, it's a short-statured grass. It looks very similar to Bermuda grass. It's got a lot of seeds. And the ringnecks and the canvasbacks and the redheads really love this seed. And some of these landowners, what they're doing is that they'll flood their wetlands a little bit deeper during this late October and November period to provide these diving ducks a little bit of an opportunity. And then as early December comes, they start lowering those wetlands to get them a little bit more shallow, because a lot of times those divers are starting to move on to different wetland complexes throughout the state. And landowners are then focusing on wetland management more for greenwing teal, which were like razor thin water and mudflat conditions.
So one other thing, whenever I was out there, there was another plant. I'm trying to remember what it was. Let me think here for a second. Watergrass. Am I getting that right? Watergrass is a name used for a plant out there that is it millet? Is millet out there referred to as watergrass?
That's correct. Watergrass is the same thing as barnyard grass or millet, yes.
Okay, all right, so my memory didn't fail me there. I was rather perplexed whenever I was out there and they were talking about watergrass, and I think I'd seen that in some publications also. I'm like, what the heck is watergrass? And I think, oh, it's barnyard grass, millet. So
that's right.
When you are looking forward, weather forecast. I grew up in Mississippi. You grew up in Mississippi, and so we have sort of a frame of reference there about the type of weather systems that we anticipate or want to see in order to move birds and get us excited about that. So out west in California, what are the weather systems that you're really looking for this time of year? You've talked about how it's kind of stagnant or sort of stalled a few weeks ago, but what are the weather systems that you really look for at this point?
Well, if you're in the San Joaquin Valley, you're really looking for a big northern front that comes in off the Pacific Ocean, and you're looking for a little bit of wind, a little bit of rain, and particularly if you can follow those systems up with a little bit of what I call a mid-level wet fog. You don't really want a ground fog, but you want a sort of a high fog that's really cold and really damp to follow those weather systems, because that really gets those birds anxious. And then it also makes them sort of feeding more often, more than one time a day. But if you're in the Sacramento Valley, you don't want as much of a north wind all the time. You want a nice south wind. And the reason why is that a lot of these birds can move back and forth. back and forth from the San Joaquin Valley to the Delta to the Sac Valley and back. So a lot of times when the San Joaquin Valley gets in with a big old storm system and south wind comes in, we lose a lot of our birds. They go to the Delta, they go to the Sac Valley. But when that north wind turns around, a lot of times those birds sort of move back. So, it's sort of, it's a little different, growing up in Mississippi, you're always excited about, a front. It didn't matter if it was a south wind or a north wind. You could have, you just had bird movement. But here, if you start having a south or east wind, it's pretty much death to, a lot of bird numbers here in the San Joaquin Valley. Birds just disappear.
Each year, DU volunteers and staff hold more than 4,000 fundraising events across the country. By simply attending a local Ducks Unlimited event, you can have a great time while helping DU fill the sky with waterfowl for future generations. To find an event in your area, visit www.ducks.org/events.
What are you seeing for geese out there this year?
Geese numbers are largest in the Sacramento Valley, mainly because there's larger wetland complexes and a lot more flooded ag. Lots of rice, and then as you transition south out of the Sacramento Valley, you transition into the Delta, which has lots of corn. So between, corn and, some of those green winter wheat fields and rice, you have, lots and lots of snow geese. The geese really showed up early this year. A lot of speckled bellies, white-fronted geese came in early. And now we're starting to see the snow geese starting to show up in the San Joaquin Valley in good numbers. Traditionally, there was a lot more geese here in the San Joaquin Valley, but as, traditional ag, a lot of the corn, a lot of the rice, started to disappear off the landscape, the geese sort of shifted around too.
What did those crop types shift to?
A lot of those crops shifted to either cotton or permanent crops like orchards, like nut crops, like almonds and pistachios.
Oh yeah, that's right. Okay, that's what's causing some of the land use change there. Okay, and so the snow geese that you get out there are going to be primarily from Wrangell Island, right?
That's one component of them, but yes, yep.
Okay, but you do get some from the Western Arctic as well. All right. And I don't know if you chase geese very much, but if you've seen flocks of geese, have you paid any attention to the age ratio, the ratio of juveniles to adults? Any idea what productivity was like out of those nesting colonies? We had Ray on a couple of episodes previously, and he wasn't exactly sure what productivity was like out of Wrangell Island, some of the Western colonies. Do you have a handle on that?
The few flocks I have seen. There is a pretty good composition of young birds this year.
Okay. Did you spend your time chasing the geese or mostly focusing on the ducks? Mostly
on the ducks. When I go up to the Sac Valley and such, and some of other refuges, and like Merced Refuge, which has a lot of geese out there, it's a lot of fun to go in there and scan those birds and sort of look at the ratios of young to adults, but also looking for neck collars. Sort of a fun activity to do during the the non-hunt days is when you're on the road, bring a pair of binoculars and look at the geese and sort of see if you got any neck collars, and you can always have a report and sort of get a return for the banders.
I was going to ask you if you reported those when reading the neck collars, then you report that. Who do you report that to? Maybe people that don't know.
Sure, you just you can report the bands to the bird banding lab.
Okay, so the collars, so the neck collars you report to the same place that you would report the bands. Is that right?
That's correct. That's right.
Okay. All right. There you go.
And the beautiful thing about these neck collars is that they are usually vary in colors and numeric schemes, so you don't have to have the full numeric code or the alpha code to submitted for bird band, because a lot of times they can sort of figure it out based on the information you provide. If it's a red band with white letters or such, and if you get a lot of the numbers, then they can go in there and they go through their database and they can really nail down what that bird is and where it was banded.
You can report that collared bird even if it's not harvested, is what you're saying. You go out there and look at it through a spotting scope or the binoculars. If you can get the color and you can get the alphanumeric code that's on that collar, you can report that to the bird banding lab. You don't have to harvest it in order to report that, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. So that's one of the advantages that neck collars provide over just the aluminum or other metal, other types of metal leg bands. You really can't read those from a distance, but you can the neck collars, and so that's one of the advantages of those with Geese. So a little cool piece of information there. Matt, I wanna touch on your story. I've never hunted swans. I know that's become something that you try to do occasionally. Tell me a little bit about that story, if you could. I'm not going to ask you exactly. Tell me where you went. We're going to ask you to divulge your secret hunting spot or anything like that. But I have no idea how that how the swan harvest works. Is it a quota system? Is it a permit system? How does that work?
There are several states out here in the West that permit harvest of swans. Nevada is one of them, and the state of Nevada allows you to go online and to purchase swan tags. You can purchase up to 2 swan tags a year, and it's as easy as just going online and purchasing those tags. And then the big thing is to go harvest a swan is really to figure out the time of year that they're really migrating through the state of Nevada. A lot of those birds stage in the Great Salt Lake area of Utah. And this year was one of those unique years in which it was quite warm for a long period of time, and a lot of birds just stayed in Utah, and we're utilizing the great their river marshes and all that, and hadn't really migrated. So it was one of those unique things in which we had the first strong storm front coming through. Contacted a buddy of mine, and I said, "Hey, let's go to Nevada. Let's go try." And we went out to the marsh, and underneath the guise of a great friend of mine, Chris Nicolai, who was in Nevada for a long, long time. He taught me a lot of tricks and trades on, number of decoys, some good places to go, and just weather conditions that really make those swans more attainable to put in the bag. And for me, growing up in Mississippi, we never had opportunities to, see swans or even, harvest swans. So for me, when I moved out west, it was a really unique opportunity to harvest something that was sort of unique. But the best thing is they're one of the best eating waterfowl that I've had. I sort of put them as number 2.
Number 2 behind what? When you say number 2, you have to tell me what number 1 is.
Well, number 1 is not a waterfowl, but it's sandhill crane. So that's my number 1. But then I go swan, and then I go speckled belly, and then I go to a wood duck, and then.
Yeah, of the birds that fly in the sky, the sandhill crane was going to be the number 1. I was going to agree with you there, and so I thought you were just still within the waterfowl realm. But so no, we're all good there. And what species of swans are you come through there, and did you harvest? Or tundra swans? Is that what you're dealing with?
So yeah, most of the swans are coming through Nevada are tundras, but they do have trumpeters, and they do have this quota system that they allow you to shoot swans in Nevada. When they say they let you shoot swans, if you do accidentally shoot a trumpeter, you're not going to get penalized or, a game warden to come after you. But what they do is that when you reach, you take your swan in, they measure the bill length on it, the culmen, and they take some other measurements on that bird, and therefore they can quantitatively tell you that was a tundra swan. And if they do harvest a trumpeter swan, then it goes into the database. And I think when you get, I think 8 or 9 birds, maybe 10 birds of trumpeters, that's when they shut the season down statewide.
And now the trumpeters are the larger of the 2.
That's right.
And so so that time of year they have to rely on, I would guess certainly for the juveniles, they have to rely on those measurements. Now, if you have an adult that time of year, can you differentiate between a tundra and a trumpeter with a bird in hand?
You can.
Okay. Yeah, I figured you could. I just didn't have any firsthand experience with that out there. So, and those birds, those swans, are they going to be breeders from the Intermountain West, or are they migrating from other locations north?
Most of these tundra swans are coming from Alaska and the Western Arctic.
All right, but now the trumpeters, where they're going to be from the Intermountain West?
They could be from the Intermountain West, so they could be coming from Alaska or the Western Arctic too.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm exposing a little bit of what I don't know about swans. They're a pretty cool bird. I'll have to brush up a little bit on my understanding of swan ecology. So this is helpful. Appreciate that, Matt.
No problem. Yeah, it's one of those unique things that Salt Lake is a huge staging area for these birds, and then they move to the wetlands of Nevada, central Nevada, and then they come over the crest of the Sierras, and the largest wintering area in the whole western United States is in the Sacramento Valley. And those birds then transition to mainly foraging in rice fields. So they go from native wetlands to foraging in rice fields. So these birds are pretty adaptive in their foraging ecology, and obviously they're an awesome bird to see on the landscape.
Yeah, and I think I saw from your comments it was suggested that maybe those birds have already migrated through or are starting to, or the migration may have proceeded out of Nevada at this point. Are they in California by now, for the most part?
The large portion of them are in California. You can still find them in Nevada, but typically what happens is the week of Thanksgiving, a lot of people have off, and the hunting pressure gets working on those birds, and that sort of is a push for those birds to keep on migrating and become less susceptible to harvest. You can still get them after Thanksgiving, but you got to work a little harder.
And then once they get to California, they're safe.
They're safe. That's right.
Okay. All right. Yeah, so they will boogie down to California, and that's where they're headed. And then folks just get to watch them and enjoy them do their thing. So that'd be pretty cool. There are some neat birds. And so you were able to successfully harvest a swan, right? You and a buddy of yours.
That's right. 2 swans.
Cool. And so I'm sure you have big plans for those on the table. I know you and your wife, Molly, are really good at, y'all have almost become actually, Molly is like a chef, professional chef. And so that's pretty good resource to have there, isn't it?
It is. We like to bounce a lot of ideas back and forth. And, I like to eat, and I like to eat good food. And I like to try to find ways to eat, waterfowl in different ways and present it to, my hunting friends, but also my non-hunting friends that, there's this other great resource out there, and, you can do a lot of things with it simply. That's a big thing I like to do. I like to try to, illustrate that you can eat, a lot of this waterfowl simply, and it can be really good eating. And, for me, swan, I always try to have swan at least for, Thanksgiving or for Christmas. And this year we had Thanksgiving swan to complement our deep fried turkey, and we've got swan that's going to be consumed at Christmas time too. So it's been really awesome to have those kind of great little table treats.
Okay, all right. So I can't stop there. I got to ask you about the swan. I got to ask you about the swan recipe. What did you do with the swan for Thanksgiving, and what is your plan for the swan at Christmas?
For Thanksgiving, what we did was, these were all nice fat adult birds. So I plucked the breast, left the skin on, and filleted the breast meat off the bone. I put it in a bowl of water for 3 days and took it out, a little bit of olive oil, and then with a dry rub recipe of rosemary, coarse salt, coarse pepper, a little cumin, and there's a local seasoning called Pappy's here, similar to Tony Chachere's, but not the spice. Put that dusting on both sides of the bird, and then put it in the refrigerator for about a week, uncovered, and sort of dried aged. And the other thing that I did was I also scored the breast. So scoring the breast means to create like a diamond pattern on the skin.
Kind of like some people would be familiar with doing a flounder like that. A lot of people do a flounder like that. Yeah.
Exactly. So scoring that, what it does is it helps, release the fat that's in the skin and sort of helps render it and sort of, cooks off so you don't get a greasy piece of meat, but sort of allows that skin to sort of crisp up. And then on a grill pan with a little bit of butter, a little bit of garlic, seared that swan till it was medium rare, and took it off, sliced it against the grain, and then I made an apple chutney which was sort of a spice concoction of some locally picked apples, raisins, orange peels, a little bit of thyme, and a little bit of rosemary. Cook that down till it's a nice, thick little sauce, and then sort of serve, this perfectly seared swan with a little bit of apple chutney. And man, it was a great little appetizer.
You know what I think we'll do is we'll just scrap the first part of this little episode, and then we'll just start over and just have you talk only about waterfowl recipes. How's that sound?
Hey, we can do that too.
Now, I know you do some you and Molly do some fantastic cooking. You share some of that in some of your pictures and some of your social media, and I just drool, my mouth waters, and I see all that, and it's just fantastic. And you taught me several recipes, the old go-to, and actually one of our previous guests referenced it. It's the olive oil and just the simple salt and pepper and rosemary, and then grill that thing medium rare. Now, you actually took the swan a little bit farther than that, but just as a base, it's hard to go wrong with that. And so that was Thanksgiving, and you have your plans laid out for Christmas yet?
I think what I'm going to do is I am going to, take that swan breast, do a similar preparation, but we're going to make a cranberry chipotle sauce. I've done this now ever since I harvested my first swan back in 2007. So it's just, it's a real simple chipotle peppers, a little bit of fresh jalapenos, some good cranberries. Reduce that down till it's a little thicker of a sauce, but it's got a nice sweet spice to it. And then, serve that swan with some wild rice, some candied carrots, and some Brussels sprouts. I think that's what we're going to probably be doing at that meal. Okay.
All right. When do we need to be out there?
Well, I will be in South Carolina with visiting my folks.
Oh, okay. You'll be there. Well, that's closer.
Yes, sir.
That's even better. Well, so you do most of the cooking of the wild game, or does Molly, or do y'all trade off?
I do a lot of it, but there are definitely some preparations that she likes to partake in. We have a recipe that we sort of worked with a local Chinese restaurant in Sacramento called Simon's. They make these great lettuce cups, which is, sauteed duck, plum sauce, water chestnuts, fresh onions, a little bit of jalapenos, and put it in a little bit of a iceberg lettuce cup, and it's got a little bit of a sauce. So that's one of Molly's favorite little recipes to do. But, when it comes to cooking the waterfowl and the ducks and the geese and whatever, that's one of my things I like to just take over and do my part.
That's more your domain.
Yeah.
You've kind of made that more your domain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Well, I have seen some of the pictures that y'all put out, some of the dishes y'all prepare, and it's just fantastic. And I wish we were closer and we could partake of that. But yeah, I mean, whenever we started this, I knew we were going to talk about waterfowl. I knew we'd probably talk a little bit about some of your plans with the duck, and the waterfowl you harvest. But yeah, I had no idea we'd spend about 10 or 15 minutes talking about waterfowl recipes. But that was cool. Appreciate that. That was a nice little detour.
Well, keep your eyes out on social media because I am going to be doing some swan neck tacos too.
All right. Okay. Just rub it in. Just rub it in, Matt. Okay. I think that'll wrap it up for us here. This has been fantastic. We appreciate you sharing some insights on what you do, kind of what you're seeing with respect to waterfowl conditions and habitat conditions out there right now, and even a little story about about the swan hunting, and then of course the fantastic recipes that you provided. It's way more than I ever thought we would cover today, Matt. But it turned out great. So thanks for your time, man.
No problem. Thank you, Mike, and come on and visit sometime.
We will, and we'll have you back on the show sometime in the future. Thanks, Matt.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Mike.
A special thanks to our special guest on today's episode, Matt Kaminski, regional biologist out in the Central Valley of California. He shared with us a great deal of information on waterfowl habitat, and then even waterfowl recipes. That's a fantastic combination. Thanks, Matt. We also thank our producer, Clay Baird. We'll start calling him the Electron Warrior for all of his editing on these podcasts. He does a great job getting these out to you, our listeners. And our listeners, we appreciate you and sharing your time with us and listening to these podcasts. We appreciate your comments. We're getting those. We're seeing those, and thanks for those. Join us on some future episodes, and we most importantly appreciate and thank you for your commitment to wetlands, waterfowl conservation, and the passion you put into that.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show and visit www.ducks.org/DU Podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks.